There we go. Splendid round into the pepperoni. Anyway, welcome to tonight's stream. I hope you enjoy the shenanigans. Now, as stated before, we're doing two themes for tonight's stream. One, we're actually going to review some of the cards that actually got spoiled on the weekend from this Saturday and such. Some pretty saucy ones got spoiled, so I can't wait to talk about them. Also, after that, we're going to take like a quick break just to essentially more or less set up the arena so that we can actually play a little bit of Tinker's Cube, which I think will be actually kind of like a fun way to just conclude kind of like the streaming shenanigans. Nevertheless, let us do some shenanigans, shall we? But first things first, let us get with the review. First things first, let's actually look at the first card, or let's look at this first card here, Graven Lore. And also, if you notice like a little flickering on my camera feed here, as you kind of notice, I actually now have a green screen, which is lovely, not going to lie. But I still have to do a little bit of tinkering with it. So if you notice, like you see this, if I actually have some of those, I apologize in advance. It's mostly just because I'm still in the tinkering phase of this green screen behind me. So, but still, hey, now you don't have to see the room, and it can help with some better video shenanigans. Anyway, besides that side note, let's get to the card. Graven Lore. 5 mana for a snow instant. Okay. Scry Etz, where Etz will be the amount of snow mana spent to cast this spell. And then if you do, then you will draw... And then when you do that, you draw 3 cards. It's actually pretty tempting. Like, a 5 mana draw 3 cards is a really tempting aspect. Now, on the other side of the coin, we do have stuff like... I don't think this is like going to go into like any mill deck. Maybe Teferi Tutelage Mill, but... Or Control might actually play this, but I don't think it's going to go into like Rogue Mill decks, especially if they do try to employ the snow mechanic. Mostly it's just because the factor is they have like the better spell like into the story that draws 4 cards and such. But if you're playing like any snow shenanigans, or if you're doing like any control deck, I could see them at least playing 1 or 2 copies of this, because as long as you're playing snow, this is a really big scry. Like, you can scry about up to 5, which 5 scry and then drawing 3 cards, that is a pretty good ability on a snow instant spell. You have that mana up, you can just hold that mana up for Rewind, any of the counter magic that you have, and you don't need to counter anything. Boom, Graven Lore, you're gonna scry a big amount, up to 5 potentially, and then draw 3 cards. That is in every control deck something that they want really badly. I can even see this scene play in like any snow combo decks that do need to get like a big hand. Also, keep in mind, this is also another way, it's always good to have these cards that at least draw 2 or more cards. This one draws 3. Mostly for the draw 2 archetype that was encouraged through Eldraine and such. They can definitely employ this card, so you gotta keep that in mind. Nevertheless, I'm very excited about this card. I will give it like around a... I don't want to overhype it. I'll say like a 8 out of 10, because you do have to get into Snow deck, because while drawing 3 cards for 5 mana is nice, I think you really want to take more advantage of the Snow aspect of this if you want to take the full advantage of the card. Like, I don't see this going into a non-Snow deck. Let me put it like that. Like, I would be surprised if it sees playing non-Snow decks. Next up, one of the more interesting uncommon legendaries that we've seen today. Forgive me if butchering this name, but Sivala, Ice Shaper. 1 red and a green for a legendary snow creature Troll Warrior. It has tap it for 3. Free and tap, create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manalith. With tap, add 1 mana of any color. So essentially, free mana and tapping this, you get a Manalith, which not bad actually. That's a pretty good ability. Making mana rocks off of a legendary, that's actually pretty cool. Plus, it also has an activated ability of 8, which pretty pricey, but you get something pretty good. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, you may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, this card fascinates me. Mostly because the factor is, this is kind of one of those legendaries that you can actually go with many ways of brewing around it. Mostly you do want to take advantage of the aspect that you are more or less making snow mana rocks, which if you're in any type of snow type deck design, that might be very beneficial. Especially with all the snow instant and sorcery spells we got. Like the one we talked about yesterday, the red fumarole spell that essentially gives you mana back when you deal 4 damage. I can see an argument where this and that spell go in the same deck, because you could have this out. Next turn, you have to remove something, play Thundering Fumarole, and then that free generic mana, you don't know what to do with it. Bam, you just tap this down, tap it for free mana, get yourself an Icy Manalith, and you then get some color mana that maybe you do for the Snow Shock spell, or something like that, or Snow Lightning Bolt if you have enough snow permanents. So it makes snow permanents, which could be relevant depending on your deck design. And also, just if you get to late in the game, which honestly, we are in a ramp format, so I think it's very safe to say you can get to this bottom text. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, you may cast a spell from among them. Just getting a free spell, very nice, digs into your deck, which is very nice. Also, keep in mind the creature type, not the troll aspect, but the warrior aspect, because maybe this is something like if we want to make like a snow party deck work, this might be a really nifty warrior in that deck design, because it's just a warrior. It makes mana rocks, so if you do go like a multicolor party deck, it helps you get to Fitzing to get your other party members on the battlefield. I mean, I think this is going to be a cornerstone of any like 3 to 4 color snow decks, just because of the aspect of being able to create mana rocks that can be snow permanents. Also, I do think this will be just a fun Commander to brew around. This might be the one that I might brew around for Commander when the set comes out. Mostly just because I really kind of like this make a mana rock, and you can benefit from mana rock synergies, which in Commander there's a ton. So I'm going to be optimistic and give it like around an 8 out of 10, same as the Snow Instant spell, because this is a really cool card, but it's not like the strongest card in the set. But it's still going to be like a fun, drinky brew round. I'm definitely going to have fun. I might even include 2 of these in that Legendary God Brood deck that I've been thinking about, because it's also a legendary creature that you can tap for mana, which then, since it's a snow creature, it can then tap for colorless mana, which is actually very nice, may I add. So that's something to keep in mind. Next up, we got one spicy meatball, one could say. Tyrite Sanctum, a colorless land that taps for colorless, but you can also tap it for 2 and tap it, so this is about free mana to do this effect. Target legendary creature becomes a god, in addition to its other types, and you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you want to have any other creature type become a creature that's on your battlefield become a god for any random reason, like if you're in a god tribal deck or some shtick like that, boom, you go that. And even if you don't need the god creature type, then all you can do is just put a +1/+1 counter. Free mana, putting a +1/+ counter on creatures, that's actually very nice. That can even work, like, let's say if it's still popular that people play Heartless after the beta, you could, when your card gets targeted by, like, one of your creatures get targeted by it, boom, you activate this land, put a counter on it, and then they just have to do the remove the counter aspect of it. So, also keep in mind that your creature will permanently become a god, whatever creature you target with this, so you gotta keep that in mind. Like, we have to keep in mind and look at any, like, god tribal cards that either are in the past in, like, Commander or in currently in Standard, but still, just the factor is, why do we want our card to become a god? Well, it's because of the last activated ability. 4 mana, tap it, sacrifice this land, put an indestructible counter on target god. Okay, where do we begin? First of all, we have not really seen in Standard, like, due to Ikoria, we've seen all these, like, counter matter cards, but we haven't really seen an indestructible counter, even though we know those exist from Ikoria. And we have seen, like, little counter synergies have been sneaking in through Kaldhiem and such, like with stuff like the flying counters that we've been seeing on, like, the angel enchantments and stuff like that. So, seeing that we have now a card in Standard that can give something a indestructible counter, that is nothing to sneeze at, let me put it like that. Now, yes, it is technically 5 mana and you are sacrificing a land. However, getting an indestructible counter is very tempting on some specific creatures, either both in Commander or even in Standard. Like, let's go to Standard first. In Standard, there's just a ton of very powerful creatures that we would not mind if they stayed on the battlefield, but we probably don't have, like, the protection spell right in hand. We could just use this as a combat trick. Like, if your opponent tries to remove your creature, boom, tap 5 mana. It's a really expensive combat trick, but target your god. And even keep in mind, like, we could also talk about, okay, I'm kind of going off tangent here, but follow me on this. Also, keep in mind, this ability is very nifty on creatures that are gods, and we have been seeing a lot of gods in the set that are potentially very good standard viable cards. Stuff like Torah, the Segrid one that's really scary, stuff like that, essentially. So, being able to keep those gods protected by essentially, boop, being able to give it indestructible, very, very nice. That is a very, very nice ability. Plus, as now stated before we went to that, there's also a variety of other non-god creatures that you can make gods that then when they get the indestructible counter can be very, very absurd. Like any hexproof creature, boom, you do a hexproof creature, you give it indestructible, it has hexproof, it makes it about an untargetable killing machine. That can be very scary. Now, the catch-22 with this card is we still have Extinction Event in the format, which could, it's a mass exile spell, so you are not going to protect your creature from that. Plus, also, we do have stat reduction spells that are in the format / coming to the format, so that could also negate this. However, there is also cards like the Ozlith, so once we activate this once on a creature, our creature gets removed by, say, an exile spell or something like that. Then we can actually get the indestructible counter on the Ozlith, which then, once we make another creature into a god, because note, this is not a legendary land, which means you can play multiple copies of this, keep that in mind. So then we can actually make another target creature a god, and then once we transfer counters to it, we can just essentially do that. Actually, I don't even think you... Oh, no, wait, you don't even have to. With the Ozlith, you just transfer all the counters, so you don't even have to make it a god. So you get an indestructible counter, next time you play a creature, boop, it has an indestructible counter on it. And if we put that on creatures like Terror the Peaks, Questing Beasts, heck, even a Shia, that will be absurd. So yeah, I'm really optimistic on this card. Also, one thing to keep in mind, it is colorless, so anything like Forsaken Monument and such that can make this double its mana, keep that in mind. There's also stuff like Lithiform Engine to double the triggers. That's another thing you have to keep in mind. So, yeah. Also, there are ways to, pretty much like with that Elemental Thoughts we got from Ikoria, to essentially reduce the cost of these activated abilities, so that's really nifty. I'll be optimistic and give this like a 9 out of 10. I do think this actually has both a chance for Janky Brews, but also might actually see a few... I could see some people playing a few copies of this in Standard just to protect their creatures. Though the only catch-22 is, like I said before, there is still Exile spells, there's Extinction Event, and there is still Ugin that you gotta keep that in mind, and no matter if you make your creature a god or make it into an indestructible god, it still can't survive an Ugin board wipe. Actually, yeah. Coming with that thought, I might just actually reduce it to an 8 out of 10. Because, yeah, in Standard, but in Commander, okay, we'll keep it 9 out of 10, because in Commander, there's just a lot of janky shenanigans you could do with this. Like, you can actually make the original Nicobolus into a god, that's funny, ha 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 ha. And I even saw, not Andrew, no, it is Andrew. Andrew, who pretty much has the Bushwag icon, was like, I can finally make my Bushwag Ascended into a god. There's really janky shenanigans. You can even make, the most minute creature into a god and make it indestructible, which is pretty funny. Not gonna deny that. So, you can use it to protect the most powerful creatures in your deck, or you can use it to protect the most, minute creatures, for lack of a better word. Next up, this is interesting. Horizon Seeker. It is 2 and a green for a creature human warrior, but it has boastful 1 and a green, so when this attacks, you can activate this ability. What does it do? You search a library for a basic land, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. I like this more for limited than I do for constructed, because for limited, this is actually pretty decent. A free mana for you 2, perfectly fine, and then if you have the mana sink, you can just essentially sink the mana into doing this, and filter out your deck by getting more lands that can help you maybe ramp into your late game threats or such, or mid-range threats, so I like that. In Constructed, I mean, I don't know. It is an aggressive way to essentially get a land fetch ability, which, who knows, maybe aggro decks that do have a mid-range strategy still might employ this card, just for the fact that they can filter out their deck and just essentially get lands they need for their late game to mid-range threats. I could see that argument. I could definitely see that argument. But I don't know. It's like one of those where I'll say it has like a slim chance to see standard play, mostly just for the factor that this can be an aggressive boasting creature that can still help you get your land drops and essentially play your, especially if you're a multicolored deck, to get your late game threats. I can definitely see that, but I don't know. Like, I'll be optimistic and give it like a 6.5 out of 10. It has a chance, and also it's a human warrior, so you could put it into a party deck, so an aggro party deck might actually like this, so that's something to keep in mind. So, yeah. 7 out of 10, it's averagely good, and the decks that want to play it will probably play it. Next up, Frenzied Raider. 1 in a red for a Demon Berserker. It's a 2/2 and has, whenever you activate a boast ability, put a +1/+1 counter on Frenzied Raider. It's fine. It's a perfectly fine card, because the thing is, it's a 2-mana 2/2. That's not bad, even though we have better 2-drops in the format. But it is kind of nice to have like a boast energy in limited. Like, you go into the boast deck, for example, in draft or limited or sealed. You can have this as a perfectly fine 2-drop bear that essentially will get bigger every time you activate a boast ability, which is really nice. And it's a permanent buff. It's not a temporary buff. So every time you boast, it gets bigger, it gets bigger, it gets bigger, which then could make it into a mid-range to even a potentially late-game threat if not answered. At the very least, it can make it where most people want to remove this before you remove your late-game threat. So I can definitely see that. In Standard, the only way I see this card seeing Standard play is if somebody makes like a boast aggro-ish deck that has like maybe a counter-based synergy into it, because we do have a lot of counter matter synergies, and this is another way to just get counters by not having to activate spells. Like, all you have to do is just get a boast and boom, +1/+1 counter on it. So that's the only place I can see this card seeing play in Standard. But if that deck does not exist, then I think the card will not really be that playable. In Limited, it's going to be really good, especially if you get a lot of both spells. But in Standard, in Constructed, I don't know. Like, you could definitely do some jank with it in EDH, so I could definitely see that. I'll be optimistic, and like I gave the Landfetcher one, because they probably go in the same deck, I probably will give this a 7 out of 10. I think mostly you're going to see play of this in Limited, because it's a really good Limited card, but in Constructed, I don't know. It really depends how constructed viable boast decks are, and we really don't have a hunch yet about how constructed viability those boast decks can be, to put it bluntly. Okay, first of all, my apologies of my change of character at the moment, but, yo, look at the cute little puppy. Look at that cute little puppy. Okay, back into the reviewing character. For Fearless Pup, 1 red for a 1/1 that has First Strike. It has Boast for 2 in a red, so that essentially makes it where Fearless Pup gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So it can, with its Boast ability, become a 3/1 with First Strike. And of course, it has the most adorable flavor text ever. Ooh. Okay, let's go on a little sidetrack with the flavor. This is hilarious because with all the boast cards that we've been seeing, it's mostly in the flavor text where everybody is just boasting, like, I had butted a troll. I can climb this mountain in 2 days. Like, you know, simple little bragging stuff when you're boasting yourself. And just seeing that the boasting here, it's just the little cute puppy just going, howling in the art. It's just, this is perfect. This is like a perfectly kind of like cute flavor-wise card. It's adorable. It's the factor that it just has that flavor text that complements the art. It's just, Now, cuteness aside, the card itself is fine. I mean, I think this is more limited. If you need a 1-drop with First Strike to be aggressively oriented, that then you can have a mana sink ability into, perfectly fine. In Constructed, I think there are better boast cards you would want to play. I would not blame anyone who played a cat dog deck and they just put this in. Yes, we know it's a wolf, but let's be frank, it's a cute puppy. I'm not going to look at someone in the wrong way if they put this in their cat dog deck because it's a cute puppers. I'm not gonna blame them one bit. Though, hey, it is Wolf, so you could probably put in a red-green Wolf Tribal, especially if you just want a cute puppy, because, seriously, that card is so cute. You're adorable. It's just howling in the fire, howling at the fire, making sure it's good going, woo! Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. This just card's so cute. But, honestly, if I had to give it a realistic score, I'll give it like a 5-ish out of 10, maybe even a 6 optimistically. I'll give it like 5.5 out of 10. Like, if you need a curve filler for limited in your aggro decks, I can definitely see it. And in constructed, I'm not gonna look at you the wrong way if you put it in your cat dog deck, because it's a good doggo. Oh, it's a good doggo. I know it's a wolf, but hey, it's a cute puppy. Okay? Okay. Next up, Frozen Blessing, a snow sorcery that has a century free and a green. It has Distribute X, +1/+1 counters among any number of creatures you control, where X is the amount of snow mana spent to cast a spell, and you didn't draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. I actually kind of like this card a lot for mid-range decks, especially if you go into the snow strategy, because mostly, if you go into the snow decks, this is just essentially 4 mana, distribute 4 counters wherever you want on your creature designs, on your creatures. And if you're playing a mid-range deck, you're going to have a lot of 2/2s, free-frees. I mean, heck, we still have Love Streak Beast in the format. That's just an easy 5/5, so you can play the Love Streak Beast on turn 3. Play Frostgen. Let's say you have like that 1/1 token early game and you have like a 2-drop. You could just as simply distribute the counters on the 1-drop and the 2-drop, like the 1/1 token and whatever your 2-drop was, more or less, and then just essentially draw about 2 the free-ish cards, potentially? That's not bad. That is not a bad draw spell. Now, if there's only thing that's going to keep this card in check is that it is a snow spell, so we do have a few little bit of snow hate, so it's really going to depend on snow decks can exist in the format. Plus, also, the other aspect you got to keep in mind on this card is that people can respond to it by removing your creatures when you essentially try to target. Well, no, you first have to have the spell in the stack, and you have to essentially... Oh, it's a distribute, so you're not really targeting the creatures before it gets removed, so actually, none of mine on that. I was going to say that people could respond by removing the creature you put counters on, but I do think you can actually wait till the spell resolves before you distribute the counters and such, so let's scratch that statement. And also, the other thing that I think people need to keep in mind with this card is that there is a lot of better card draw spells in the format, like Great Hinge is still a very popular card. We even still have stuff like Eldritch Visionary, etc., etc. So, I think like in a mid-range aggro deck to maybe even Gruul Landfall might even give this a shot. Maybe? Maybe. I will say maybe on that. I'll still be optimistic and give it like 7.5 out of 10. It's a really good card. Plus, also, if you play this in the same deck with Vorinclex, making those counters double is nothing to sneeze at. That's all I'm going to say there. But also on the opposite end, if someone's playing Vorinclex against you, you're going to feel really bad about that card in your deck. Or in your hand when you see it. Nevertheless, next card, Priest of the Dam. A snow creature, zombie cleric. It's a 0/4, and it has, you can tap it and sacrifice this creature. Target creature gets -X until end of turn. Well, X is the number of snow lands you control. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. I'm actually a lot more optimistic with this card in Constructed than I thought I was going to be quite frankly honest with you. Mostly because of a few things. One, if the snow deck exists, this could sometimes in some circumstances be like a Grasp of Darkness. That's not bad. And depending on how many snow permanents, this could in theory be able to kill a Lovestruck Beast, which is nothing to underestimate, especially in this format. The other aspect of this card, though, that's really, really good is just the factor is that it's a 2-drop. We have Lurrus still in the format. We have ways to reanimate it, so you can just recast this from your graveyard with Lurrus and still have this activated ability on the theoretical stack next turn and such and be able to constantly remove your opponent's stuff. This is also a cleric, so if you have the cleric tribal deck, maybe this is a cleric you want to put in your deck, at least as to try it out. Especially if you play like a snow cleric deck, potentially. So, yeah, and it's also just a 0/4. So, and 0/4 is perfectly fine in this format to help us against like early game aggro. Now, granted, it doesn't help against the landfall variations that run like the elemental and such, and stuff that essentially can't, more or less, you can't block creatures with 0/4, especially if they run stuff like Questing Beast. But against like the aggro decks that run like Fervent Champion, Rob the Rich, etc., etc., this card is perfectly fine as a blocker to block those creatures. So I'm gonna be slightly optimistic and actually give this, weirdly enough, an 8 out of 10. I think this is actually a lot better, and this might actually be just a really good budget removal option in any decks that try to do the Lure Snow shenanigans. Weirdly enough. That is so weird. Anyway, next one, we did got the translation for this, is Rovan Lights Valley. It's a land, it taps, enters the battlefield tapped, and then as this enters the battlefield, you choose a color, and then it has tap it to add 1 mana of the chosen color. This one's weird because, on one hand, it's a decent budget land option if you go into the snow deck, not gonna lie. On the other hand, we have snow basics, and we also have the snow dual lands, which then those dual lands can be fetched with any spells that can fetch like a forest, island, etc., etc. So we see more of those fetch lands in the format, then this card might not see much play. And we even see stuff like Fabled Passage, which sure, enters tapped early, but then later down the line, you can actually just tap it and get untapped color mana, so I can see it in some budget snow decks giving this a shot, but honestly, this is mostly just a limited card. You're mostly playing this in limited if you're playing a multicolor snow deck. It helps you with your fit scene. Nothing that needs that. I'm not going to say that it won't see constructed play in some decks, especially if snow gets heavily emphasized in like competitive metas per se. But there's just better options if I'm being honest. Like enough that I would just give this a 6 out of 10. It's not bad, not amazing though. Though there is one deck I'd probably put this in, at least Commander. I might put it in my Sultai Snow deck that's running Archellos probably that I'm going to brew once the set comes out. I could definitely see myself doing that, so that's probably where it's going to see play, if anything, other than just like some budget options for snow decks. Okay, let's talk about this little card. Cosmosic Elixir. 4 mana for an artifact. It has, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card if your life total is greater than your starting life total. Otherwise, hey Aziel, otherwise, you gain 2 life. Gotcha. Sorry, I forgot to close the door. Anyway, so what do I think about this card? I think it's good, but it's not as amazing as people think at first glance. Now, let's get the few things out of the way. Yes, you could debate that this is technically mono-white card draw because mostly mono-white decks like to do the life gain synergies and such. And then if you have higher life total than your opponents, or actually, if you just keep your life total above your starting life total, this is just essentially a 4 mana, draw a card at each of your end steps, which is nice. But the thing is, you're only drawing the cards on your turn. And the catch of this card, and this is a really weird catch, I know a lot of people kind of get the misconception because it's like, oh, you're always going to be above your life total in mono white because you're going to have a lot of life gain and such, yada yada yada, etc. Plus, this also synergizes with life gain synergies like a Giant's Primate, etc., 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 like Heliod, etc., etc. The problem is in Commander, dealing with 4 players to keep your life total above its normal total is a lot tricky, especially if people know you're a life gain deck. Like, I know people are saying, oh, this is the card draw for white. I don't know if it is. Like, will people try it as just a fun budget option? Of course. But as like a all-star, oh, this is going to be a staple, it's mono-white card draw, I don't know. I still think it's going to be a card that I think I could see some people trying in Standard at the very least, because the life gain deck is a thing. And in Historic, because life gain deck is a thing. And you still get beneficial synergies from just getting the monumental life gain, which is nice. But that's really the only way I see this card seeing play. Because the thing is, in Standard, you have that free drop Angel that increases the life gain to just a little bit, like, so it's now you're gaining free life each turn. And we have a lot of cards that were from the last core set that has, if you gain free life, do this shtick. So I could see, like, in a deck, like, you turn 3, play that Angel, turn 4, play this, gain free life, you played some cards earlier, like the Griffin enchantment that essentially gives you free life, then you can make a token, stuff like that, essentially. So in Commander, will people try this? Yes. Do I think it's going to be an all-star in Commander? Probably not. Probably not. In Standard, though, I think it has a slim chance, so I'm going to be optimistic and, like, give it a 7.5 out of 10. I do think it's good, but I don't think it's, like... A lot of people have been overhyping this card. Even I almost overhyped to be like, wow, this card might be really good Commander staple. It's not going to be a staple. It's going to be a good card if you are in the right deck for these synergies, but really, you're not going to throw it just in any deck. Next up, I am going to butcher this. I apologize in advance. The Immersturm Predator. It is a 4-mana 3/3 Vampire Dragon. It is a 3/3. It has flying. It has whenever this becomes tapped, keep in mind, tapped, it doesn't even have to attack. So if you have any tap synergies, keep that in mind. Exile up to one target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on this card. And then you can sacrifice another creature to essentially this card will gain indestructible until end of turn, but then you have to tap it. Okay, a few things to keep in mind. I think things that people are going to miss with this card. First thing, this card constantly gets bigger. I think a lot of people are going to mistake this and think this is like a Scavenging Ooze-like card where you have to exile the card to put a +1/+1 counter on it. No. When you attack, it's a choice that you can exile up to one target card. So you don't even have to exile a card. And then if you don't, you still get the +1/+1 counter on this. So this still is going to constantly get big. So you don't even have to constantly exile a creature. You got to keep that in mind. I think a lot of people are going to miss that aspect of this card. And then once they play it and realize, oh wait, this is going to get bigger each turn I either attack or tap with it. Yes, it is. But just the fact that we do have that ability to exile up to one target card from a graveyard, very nice. Especially in like our format, which might have a very heavy encouragement of reanimator strategies / the escape strategies and all that stuff that we've been seeing. This is actually a nice card to hit out very problematic cards. And you can even exile your own stuff if necessary, just to help you against like the Rogue Mill match archetype and such. And also, just the activated ability to sacrifice another creature to give this indestructible ability. That's very nice, especially since it's one that you don't have to spend mana on it to activate this ability. So if you're playing like a Sacrifice Aristocrat style deck, this is actually really nice. Like a lot of people have been saying that they're probably going to throw this in their Core Vault deck and in Commander, and I could perfectly see the reason why for that. So it's a unconditional sacrifice engine, which is very nice. This is a very good card. Like, it's like a 9 out of 10. I would be very dumbfounded if this doesn't see standard play, because Graveyard Hate is very important now in the meta, and getting really good threats is very important, because you can use this to just block a Questing Beast if you need to, sacrifice something, tap it down, and then just essentially keep it indestructible, but then make it bigger and bigger and bigger until Questing Beasts can't even attack into it. That's very good. That is very good. Now, it doesn't protect itself against exile spells, and exile spells are still popular in the format, so you gotta keep that in mind, but in really any aggro deck, or any deck that is taking advantage of the sacrifice aspect of this, like Aristocrat decks, they're going to like this card a lot. Like, this is an 8 out of 10. It's a very, very good Magic card. Plus, it's also our second Vampire Dragon we ever had in Magic, so that's exciting. Next up, a very interesting design of a saga. It's a rare saga, 1 in Azorius for the Raven's Warning. Step 1. Create a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, and you gain 2 life. Okay, very nice. Little anticlimactic, but it's nice. Step 2. Whenever one or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player this turn, look at that player's hand and draw a card. Okay, that's really nice. Then step 3. You may put a card you own from outside the game on top of your library. And that, my friends, is why this card becomes a very, very spicy meatball. This card's good, y'all. This card's really good. Okay, here's the thing. The factor is, mostly the reason why I think this card's really good is because, yes, the wish aspect of the card is really nice, but you gotta keep this in mind of how this card is kind of like works. What makes this card really nice is the factor is of the second step of all things. Because you already create a bird. If you put this like in a blue-white's flyers list, you are probably going to have flyers in general. So you being able to, when you deal combat damage with a creature with flying, just draw a card, which is nice, but looking at your opponent's hand, that is really good, especially when you consider the aspect that you know what they're going to be playing. Granted, then next step, you could tutor for a card that can counter with what's in their hand. That is a pretty nifty thing. Like, for example, let's say you play this on step 2, you play this, you go to step 2, you attack like with the 1/1 bird token because they didn't remove it. You essentially then draw your card, but then you look and you're like, oh, they have an Ugin in hand, and they're very close to casting it, but not yet. Okay, step 3, I'm going to tutor a Disdainful Stroke in my sideboard. Get it in my set, got it on the top of my library, play like an op to cheaply draw it, and then now I have a Disdainful Stroke to essentially counter their Ugin. And it's like stuff like that. So if there's anything that will make this card see play, it's mostly the aspect that you are going to get information from your opponent if you're able to do combat damage to it on turn 2. Plus the fact that with that information, you can actually dictate what you want to get from the sideboard to help out your game plan. Now, obviously, this is probably want to be in a flyers list of some sort. That's a no-brainer. But I do think this card has some pretty good potential. And even if your opponent doesn't have a significant threat you need to get from the sideboard, hey, get that extra turn spell from the sideboard, put it on top, and then just get ready to lay it down the line, get an extra turn, and make some birds. So, yeah, I think this card has a pretty good chance of seeing play. Like, this is like a 9 out of 10. And keep in mind, it can tutor for any type of card. It can tutor for creatures or planeswalkers or artifacts or stuff. You're not like restricted like with Fave Wishes where you have to make sure it's a non-creature spell. This can tutor for any card in your sideboard. Don't underestimate that ability. I can even see some people playing this card and just essentially getting it so that they can deal the combat damage and they need to get a specific land for a specific on-curve play. They have Fable Passage in their sideboard. They essentially get the Fable Passage, put that on the top of their library, play the Fable Passage, get the land, and such. I could even see some people playing it like that. Because in the aggro decks, which mostly blue-white flyers is, even though this is more wanting to be in a mid-range deck, you do have to get on-curve mana to fit with your aggressive like curve, and this could just work perfectly just for that. If there is one con to the card, and I would say one con to it, is that, well, it's kind of like one of those weird cards where, granted, when you're on turn 3 and you're playing like an aggro flyers list, you kind of want to build the board, and free mana for just a 1/1 is a little anticlimactic. Granted, you do get the other 2 steps, which that's what you're paying the mana for, but you mostly might want to play, like, say, a 2/2 flyer, or, like, maybe even a card draw spell, or something like that. And just, this is... it's fine. Like, it's definitely fine. I do think it's a really good card, though. Like, good enough that I think I give it a 9 out of 10. If a flyer decks exist, they are going to like this card a lot. Also, keep in mind, there are ways to give creatures flying using, like, counters and such, so... or combat tricks, so keep that in mind. Next up, the Rootless Yew. It is a 5-mana creature tree folk. It has a 5/4, and it has when this creature dies, search your library for a creature card with power or toughness 6 or greater, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library. This one's actually a pretty good card. Like, a 5-mana 5/4, fine. A tree folk, that's actually pretty relevant, especially if you play it like in a corner. It's that new legendary that came from Commander Legends. That's Abzan, the last U, I think. Even though this is a Lootless U and such, you can put it in that deck and be able to tutor for a card to put in your hand. In Standard, I mean, the catch-22 with this card is we don't really have that many creatures that have a toughness of 6 that we would want to play in Standard. The power 6, though, maybe? That's really going to be the catch-22 with this card, because you want to get a late-game threat, of course, but Really, the only threats that we have that would fit this cause is like stuff like Massacre Worm, I would say. But the only catch 22 though is just, well, actually, we could actually figure this out pretty easily. People have this related search. Let's see what cards we can find that are standard legal. Now, this could also be relevant for commanders, so keep that in mind, but let's see if we see anything that's a standard card that can be fetched with that. Okay, you could get... Oh, no, wait, that's commanders, so nope. Ancient Green Warden? Okay, that actually might be something relevant. Being able to tutor an Ancient Green Warden? Okay, okay. Angel of Destiny? That could be relevant in the life gain decks. Okay, okay. That could be relevant. Archipelago? Archipelago? Yeah, I can see that argument. And we'll just search this one more time just to... Oh, Asterix! You could actually tutor for Asterix. Huh. Huh. Okay, this might actually have a little bit of a chance. But mostly in the decks that have very specific combo creatures that they want to get on that has that Sit's ability and such. Because if there is one strength to the card, is the fact that it is aggressive oriented, so it can attack in. And then when your opponent has to remove this, then you get the die trigger. Though, yet again, there is a catch-22 that if this gets exiled, you don't get the death trigger, which is a little bit awkward, so... I'll be optimistic and give it like a 7.5 out of 10. I can see some people trying it in their decks just to give it a shot, but it's not like the most amazing card ever. And we talked about these cards yesterday, so that is the review for today. Now, as stated before, there's a little bit more that we're going to be doing. I'm going to get a quick, commercial break. Hopefully then be able to set up the arena client, and then we're going to play a little bit of Cube, y'all! So let us play a little bit of what we call the Cube. Nevertheless, if you have any questions and such regarding to cards and such, just ask me in the comments. But let me actually, this is the first, well, not first, but it's like the second time I did this where you can actually activate a commercial. So hang on a minute. I gotta go to my Twitch channel, go to the stream manager and such, and just essentially do this. Being live, y'all, you have to pretty much learn how to do some stuff that you're not used to, so... Including that. Okay, so we go to the creator dashboard. We go to stream manager. There we go. And then we're going to run a quick ad break while I set up the arena client. So stay tuned. We are going to do some shenanigans. About a beep.